Hello, everyone. We can see people just filtering into the session. So we'll get going in about 1 minute. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll get going with everything in about a minute's time. All right. Should give everyone enough time to have got a coffee on the go. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining this Digital Ship Media webinar. We're really excited to be discussing the move from compliance-led decarbonisation to performance-led decarbonisation, and in all honesty, whether that is a fact or a fiction, and if it is a fact, how we're actually going to make it happen. We have obviously seen throughout 2025 the creation of and the putting forward of, and then ultimately the dismantling of the net zero framework. And we're now at a point where, from a regulatory standpoint, we don't really know what is going to happen next. Are we going to end up with a global framework for emissions? Are we going to end up with lots of regional frameworks for emissions? And where does that leave ship owners and charterers and technology suppliers who are trying to support the industry to decarbonise? So what better way to unpack that than to bring together ship owner, charterer and technology provider into one session to discuss what is, I think, one of the most important topics of 2026, how we move from what has become primarily a compliance-led discussion around decarbonisation to bringing it closer in line to commercial performance. What I'd like to do as a starting point is we'll introduce our panel, and then we're going to move into a few of the kind of key discussion points that I want to bring up. But we also want you in the audience here to be part of the discussion today. So you'll see at the bottom of your little Zoom panel here, there is a Q&A button. If you click that Q&A button, it will open up a dialog box for you to submit written questions to our panel of experts. And we need you to be part of the discussion because you're here for a reason, and we want you to get the most out of it as possible. So we've dedicated time towards the end of this session to answer your questions. What always happens on these sessions is we have very few questions at the beginning of the Q&A, and then far too many questions to answer them all at the very end of the Q&A. So what I would encourage you to do is, as you're listening to the discussion, if you think of a point you'd like to raise, or if you think of a question you'd like to ask, just pop it straight into the chat and we'll come to it in good time. Without any further ado, then let me bring our panelists in. Luigi, let's start with you. Could we just have a brief introduction of who you are and the organisation you represent? And then let's just talk about this question around decarbonisation as well. When you look at it from your perspective, what are the things that charterers most often get wrong in their conversations with ship owners about sort of enabling decarbonisation?
Yes, thank you, Dominic. Thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation. So my name is Luigi Cafiero, and I am the CCO at Kwong Maritime Services in the UK. We are traditionally a ship owner, 75 years next year, owned by one family in Hong Kong, the Chow family. And today we are active mainly into dry bulk, tankers, and gas carriers from a ship owning point of view. My responsibility, just to sort of frame it a little bit, around developing the business and expanding our footprint mainly into the West, but also we have particular focus in Japan. Diving into the question, I think it's when we look at sort of our relationship with charters when it comes to decarbonization, I think the biggest sort of point of contention is what do we do with data? Is it a matter of just reporting the data? And why can't we just create a framework where we actually use the data to basically come out better off as both ship owners and charters? I think that's really where we see a lot of value. As ship owners, we obviously own the data, we produce the data, and we're more than willing to sort of look at it in a more constructive way with our charters.
Fantastic. I think that whole question around who owns the data and how the data gets used, I think, is a really interesting one that we'll definitely spend a bit more time on through this session. Willem, why don't you go next? Give us an introduction to yourself, and I'll reverse the question for you. What is it you think that the thing that ship owners most often get wrong when it comes to the decarbonisation question from a charterer's perspective?
Sure. Good. Thanks for the opportunity, Nick, and the rest of the team. It's good to be here, and it's also good to give our view every now and then. So it's nice to be given this opportunity to speak. My name is Willem Vermaat. I'm a Dutch citizen originally, but I have moved around quite a bit, and I've been involved in shipping for the last 30-something years. Today, I'm a shipping director in Heidelberg Materials Trading. We are one of the biggest cement producers in the world. We ship around 26 million tons of cargo per year. That is about 1,200 shipments a year. Everything is on voyage basis. So we don't control the ships. So we don't own the data, as Luigi says, and maybe I think you like how you started the opening question, right? It's what do you not get from the ship owner, and you're asking the ship, what do you not get from the charter? So I think you're opening up for a good debate on where we differ. I think the main thing is what we feel, and Luigi has best intentions. I can hear that, but what we feel is that the owners, they take care of the compliance, but they do not take care of the commercial aspect. So what they do is they will take care of the compliance because that's what they have to do. They have to lower their scores and they have to follow all the regulations and so on. And then they tell us this costs you $1 per ton or whatever they say, right? And then for us it goes like, okay, fine, we'll pay it, but where does it go? What happens afterwards? So what I would like to see, and Luigi says he's ready to share, but there's not many owners who want to share where actually that dollar or that extra, that premium, where does it go? And that's something we would like to see more of.
I think that's.
I don't mean to go too early, sorry, and I don't want to compare, but I think really, the interest must be aligned, right? And the incentive must be aligned because that's the answer to me to that question. Sorry to start early the conversation.
No, I'm going to come back to exactly that line on incentives, Luigi. So thank you for raising it. But before I do, last but by no means least, our partners on this webinar, Accelleron. Brian, give us an introduction to yourself and the kind of role you play in this ecosystem, and then you're kind of sat in the middle as a technology supplier enabling all of this transformation. What's everyone getting wrong?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a loaded question too, actually. I'm the head of strategy for the digital division of Accelleron. Accelleron is a company with a 100-year legacy based in Baden in Switzerland, and I think foremost known for turbochargers. They are the inventor of the turbocharger and have their turbochargers on a significant part of the world fleet. My background is in weather routing and voyage performance monitoring. I used to have a weather routing company called True North Marine that was acquired by Accelleron in 2024. And the idea behind that was to marry the technical side and the commercial side under one platform as much as we could, to have a more holistic view of the ship. I think it's fascinating to listen to Willem and to Luigi. And I think for us, part of our aspiration is to have this platform where owners and charters can work together on some common goals. Obviously, there are commercial elements that will have to stay confidential, but there are overlapping problems that the owners and the charters face together. And if we can create a trusted place where they can work together on certain aspects and both gain out of them, that's where we see an opportunity in the years to come, driven by this need to take emissions into account.
I think there's a kind of a few interesting things at play as well. One is just, can we physically get the data together to be able to improve the picture? That's question one, and I think that's tricky. And then two is how do we make sure everyone is aligned to improve this performance? And I think Luigi's kind of hit on exactly that point around incentives. Everyone kind of wants to do the right thing, right? There's no one, at least I think very, very small number of people across the industry who are sort of deliberately not trying to do the right thing, but actually building alignment of incentives across the industry is the hard point. So let's start there. Perhaps, Willem, I'll get your take on that initially around why do you think incentives aren't aligned on this stuff?
Yeah, I think it would, especially in the dry bulk sector, maybe tankers is a little bit different. In dry bulk, it's so the market is so fragmented, right? There are so many owners, and I have a small family, and even just 4 people getting them aligned on a plan is difficult. So imagine several hundred ship owners, right, who have very high commercial interest and economical dependency on this, right? So I think it's the fragmentation in the market that makes it very difficult. The good thing also is why we like this business is it's universal, right? We're doing this worldwide, so whatever rules are valid in one country or one area is not valid in another area. So how can we make all these schemes work together? And you can see even in Europe there's different schemes, and maybe now the Turkish people are making a scheme, and the Chinese and the Indians and so on. So I think a lot of this alignment is simply missing because there's not one governing body. The IMO is there, of course, but you see it, they're not moving, or at least they're not cutting to the chase, and that's probably, I think, so the main challenge is the fragmentation. Yeah.
I think if I can also sort of chime in here, it's absolutely about regulation, which is rather frustrating from an owner's point of view, because as you said, Willem, right, we need to comply. Our ships need to comply and need to comply in a number of markets. But also what you touched upon earlier is the data, is the quality of the data, right? And I think that's how the problem needs to be broken down into various parts. I think already if we can all agree on one source of data, one truth, that would already sort of negate a lot of the problems. The truth is we are at the beginning of the journey, right? Sensor technology, for example, is just catching up. It's the costs are going down, and that's how you basically then sort of bring people in. Connectivity of the ships obviously is going to be key here, where basically if you put the two together already, you should be able to have a situation where the quality of data is undisputable, right? It's coming from one source of truth. And that's how you basically immediately align a lot of the interest. Immediately you take away a lot of the contentious arguments. Think of speed claims. Today we spend more time, I mean, Brian and I have discussed this several times, and Willem, I'm pretty sure you have done too, where we are debating, we have a captain and master on the ships is creating, noon reports, and the speed claim is coming from a buoy which is maybe 20 miles away. Which one is right? Which one is the truth? That immediately opens the door for conversation. So I think already if we could all align on the data, and I think technology will play a very important role, that will be very, very important. And the next step, as Willem said, is then regulation, because that also is quite important, right? It's very hard for an owner having to comply with different sets of regulation. And lastly is the economic incentive, because completely agree with Willem, right? The market is incredibly fragmented, but what is true, it's a business. So if you can align the economic incentives and you can move from just, being complainant and report to, look, let's do something with this data. Let's make the ship better, and we share the savings that one can do. And obviously, again, technology plays a very important role. I feel that's how we're going to bring people in. That's how we're going to sort of ensure that the market has got one standard, so to speak. And then even the very few people that are not sort of interested because, they're just pure, say, tonnage provider. For example, they buy a ship, they charter it out for 10 years, so they don't see the immediate incentive. They will do, because their ships will be priced differently.
I'm going to take it. You raised 3 great points there, Luigi: data, regulation, and the economics of it. So I'd quite like to take those in turn. Starting with data, Brian, why is it so complicated to get to this kind of single source of truth? This feels like it should be a solved problem in the world we live in.
Yeah, I think there's several things there. shipping is extremely complex. I mean, there is so much data around a ship, and we've talked to clients who openly boast that they have these millions and millions of data points coming in every day. But when you pressure them a bit and ask them, well, what are you doing with this? They can't answer you. They don't even know, and it's just a lot of noise. I think Willem said it really well the other day when he said, "Are we just speeding up the amount of data coming in, but not really improving the quality?" So for us at Accelleron, that's been the challenge. That's what we've been working on these last few years. I mean, I think from our perspective, we have excellent engine data. We have, obviously all the information around the turbochargers and an intimate relationship with all the main engine manufacturers. So that's billions of data points over the years. And then we have the Voyage side too, where we're routing, thousands of voyages a year. So trying to connect those two things together, and to make it something that is digestible, that is actionable for the client. What we've found is that it can't be done, or we don't feel yet it can be completely automated. And what I mean by that is you do need a human in the loop. There is a lot of nuances in a lot of this. So we've created teams, engineers who sit and look at the engine data. We have emissions specialists who look at the emissions data and sit with the client and interpret the data that's coming in. And we found that at this stage of the game is really effective in the way we approach it. Moving forward, hopefully, with sensor data coming more of a regular occurrence, that hopefully we can take that and streamline it. But it's a huge challenge. It's not easy to do, and to sort of remove the noise, remove the outliers, and really get something that is actionable and can be used by owners and charterers. For most of them, what we see is that it's a risk assessment. It's a risk assessment on the commercial side. It's a risk assessment on the technical side. It's doing a sort of evaluation of different choices. If I do such and such, and we really see it as a decision support system. Most of these people, like Willem and Luigi, who've been doing this for such a long time, have an innate sort of sense. They know what to expect. But if we can give them data to support those decisions and sort of confirm what they're thinking, that's a huge value. And then we see with the younger generation coming up that they are very in tune with statistics, numbers. And this is what they really look to more than a gut instinct. They want those numbers to base their decisions on.
Yeah. And sorry, Nick, if I can also add to that, is to an extent, and actually for us to a greater extent, is not a matter of sharing the data also with the charters, but also internally. So if I sort of do an introspective action, is like the way we look at data today, still a ship is very much, there's different silos, right? We got our technical management, we got our operations, we got our commercial. And most of the times, efficiency lies at the intersection of these three. So that's where decisions need to be made. So it's really a mindset change. So you need the data. We have the data, but as Brian said, you need to simplify the data, how you look at the data, and then you need to act upon the data internally from a ship owner point of view. Because at the moment, there's still sort of every aspect is looked at. I feel there's different KPIs, so to speak.
And so if it's already difficult internally to align, then how are we gonna align, right? So if you already have a struggle to make your numbers, all the way through be correct, then you need to share it with me also, right? So, and you probably take a buffer as well to be on the safe side. So,
no, but I don't think it's about the numbers. I don't think it's about correctness of the numbers. It's just that when it's really you have the data, but what is it that you do with that data? And it's a matter of sharing it. That's okay, but then it's acting upon it. So because what it does, Willem, for me is I don't mind sharing it with you, but we need to do so in a framework where the sharing comes is both ways, and then there's incentives both ways. That's from charters, and our relationship most of the time is just dictated by a commercial relationship, whereas internally there's different types of dynamics, right? The technical management to a certain degree they're not commercial. They look at the life of the vessel. They sort of look at life in a certain way. So I really don't think it's a matter of accuracy of the data. I think the data is quite accurate today. Is really what is that you do with it, and then what you do with it within the realm of those dynamics.
I think that point on what it is you do with it, and actually, Brian, you used the word actionable earlier, which I quite liked. I'm curious, Willem, from a charterist perspective, what does good look like when it comes to actionable insight? I'm not going to say data. I'm going to say insight, because I think you've got to get to a point where there is something you can really understand and then take a decision on. What does good look like from an owner?
I'm sorry to say, but this it's the easy way out, right? But for us, still, the cents they count, right? So for us, we still need to fix relative cheap, right, or as cheap as possible, and that is still a hurdle in the way. And when you carry a cement as we do, or cementitious products, this is what people use to build their houses. So if we spend money on lowering the CO2 emissions, that means that the cement will become more expensive. So when you buy a sack of cement in the weekend to build your shed, then that becomes more expensive, right? And then you come to me and say why, and then I have to go all the way. So I think a good looks if it would be structured, right? So if there would be like nobody, when we changed I don't know how many years ago, changed to 92 and 95 in our cars, right? Nobody asked the question, right? It was just there, right? The fuel was just available. And I think if the authorities, I don't want to push all the responsibility to the authorities and to the regulators, but if it was there, it would just be so much easier to make people accept the additional costs, right? So if uniformity, and then that would make things easier. Of course, I would love to sit here and say we'll gladly pay $1 or $2 more, and then we save on CO2, but it's just not the reality.
We had a pre-chat last week, and during that conversation, I had 3 missed calls from the builder fitting my kitchen, that they didn't have enough screed and they needed to go out and buy some more. And so I very keenly felt the pain of the rising cost of cement immediately after our conversation last week. So we're all the consumers kind of on the end of this stuff. And I guess that brings us back, right, to the 2 areas, regulations or economics, because ultimately those are the things that are going to drive the change. So I think we know where we're at from an international perspective with the net zero framework. I don't know whether we need to go over that ground again. But Luigi, from your point of view, what direction are we heading if we assume the net zero framework is not going to happen?
And I don't think, at least not in the form that it was initially proposed. And to a degree, I welcome that, because frankly, a lot of these regulations are being sort of put together by people that have no idea about our industries. And by that, by no mean I'm trying to say, look, regulations aren't good. Regulations are very good, but they also, need to be realistic, because otherwise, for ship owners, it's virtually impossible to comply, and all you have is just extra costs. I think it's coming. Decarbonization is coming, no matter what. I mean, today for us as ship owners, probably the biggest decarbonization issue is linked to the renewal of the fleet, right? When we look at buying new ships, what kind of ships do we buy? And by that I mean, what kind of fuel are we going to make our ships sort of future-proof? And that's huge, right? Because you're talking about investments which ultimately have a 15, 20-year span. So that's critical. I don't know exactly where we are heading at. I can tell you what we hope. And it's very much sort of what Willem said. At least whatever it is, we hope to have some uniformity globally around the regulations, because that will enable us then to stop just trying to be compliant, but try to act upon it in a much more efficient way. Because, and that's where I'm slightly more pragmatic than Willem. I agree that cost is important, but the truth of the matter is today there are extra costs when you come into the EU, for example, because of FuelEU and EU ETS. And I feel that if as owners and charters we were to work together, we, rather than just have this sort of passed on cost, which it is at the moment, we're reporting, we say, look, this is what it costs, charter, please pay it, right? There's no input there, right? I feel that if we were to work together on, for example, enhancing ETA, I'm thinking Blue Visby, for example, in maximizing through technology the engine output. And if we are, and I'm putting it upon us as owners, transparent, and we were to share the incentive in doing something like that, rather than just being two different factions at war, but working together, I think already today in this very fragmented environment on certain routes, there is some good that can be done. In terms of the general outlook, we hope that new fuels such as ethanol, for example, might be one of the compromises that we might come and see. That is obviously something that you could use together with methanol. So the new methanol engines, which seems to be already popular coming up, is quite an interesting sort of scenario that. But we need politicians to do their work. We need to ensure that the money that at the moment, for example, is collected for EU ETS goes towards the renewal of the fleet rather than to basically making the cost of fuel lower, that like we're seeing today in Italy.
Yeah. It's very interesting what you're saying there, Luigi, because we've, as Accelleron, have had symposiums where we've had 4 or 5 owners, 4 or 5 charters sit together around a round table. And these are fairly well-known names in the market, not small players, but large players, and said to them, listen, guys, the way we typically operate vessels, you mentioned performance claims before around these warranties tied to good weather, and they really are archaic when you think about the way we're operating ships. And we've said, why wouldn't we work together? We have a platform where we're creating digital twins of the ship, or digital sisters, as we call them. We have we know the design, we know the engine on board. From that, we can create a likelihood of what the performance should be. We have all the weather data, and sort of sit together, and rather than just sending the ship on a single speed, work together to, much like the Blue Visby idea you said, arrive just in time, do all of these concepts, and then incentivize both sides, not just the charters, but the owners as well, that if this vessel is operated in a certain way, the owners get something back. And wide agreement around the table. Everybody's shaking their head and saying, yes, makes perfect sense. And when we said, okay, so should we do it? Everybody said, no, we're going to wait and see. So I think there's a desire in the market. I can see it, but there's so much tradition here. There's so much just built up. I don't even know the best way to put it, but it's just the momentum of the industry has been the same way so long that it's hard to bring those changes. But I think the encouraging thing is we do see some brave people who are now starting to come to the forefront and saying, yeah, we want to try these things. Especially when I consider sort of the blue chips, and I would consider both of these companies, Kwong and Heidelberg, to be blue chips that look at this and say, there is a better way to do this if we work together.
Brian, to be honest with you, I can give you my own sort of our own perspective here, where I work for a family-owned business, and to me, obviously, the mandate is I need to make money today, but also I need to ensure the company is future-proofed. And today we really reached the conclusion that unless we embrace these changes, technology will do it well. It's a coming wave, right? It's happening whether you like it or not. Today, for example, we are literally recruiting for our digitalization officer, so that the company, and mind you, that's not IT, that digitalization of a company. We ultimately are trying to work with specific charters with whom we have long-standing relationships, where we're trying biofuels, we're trying new type of technology, engine optimizations, carbon capturing, but because we feel it's not just the economic side, it's the ensuring that the company is actual in 10, 15 years and it can be passed on to the new generation. And in terms of the speed of change, look, it's shipping, right? It's one of the oldest sort of business in the world, but I feel acceleration is happening, right? Because of the technology, ultimately it's catching up with us.
Huge. I would say this all the time, that I think there's been more change in the last 2 or 3 years than the previous 25 I worked in the industry. So yeah, it's coming.
That's right.
Well, I think there's two examples I want to give. The one is, it's more than 20 years ago. I was at a meeting and we discussed the virtual NOR. So basically what you guys are saying, so we agree on when the vessel could have arrived. So let's 10 the NOR, then we slowly go there and we save the demurrage and we split. You save on the demurrage, I save on the fuel, we split the difference, right? That's more than 20 years ago. And another example, which is so typical for shipping and the conservatism is, and I don't want to derail the discussion to a different subject, but e-bills of lading. There's nothing negative about an e-bill of lading, but where is it, right? Why is it not globally implemented? So I think that just shows that the business, and I'm so happy that I'm getting older and younger people are taking over, and I really hope that they learn from our mistakes and they will do things faster and better, or more importantly, faster than we do. So
Yeah.
William, you said earlier the cents matter, and we have to fix cheap, and that, I think that brings us back to a commercial reality, right? If you need to move a cargo, you need to move a cargo, and there is a point where the market rules. I think I did some research after our last discussion. I think it's somewhere between $9 and $11 billion each year now, euros, sorry, each year now is going into the ETS coffers from the industry. So that's obviously not yet been enough to kind of move the market in this direction. What will be enough?
No, but I think that's a question we asked many years ago, also on the when we changed to the low sulfur fuels, right? Who's going to pay? And then it was also a discussion between the owner and the charter, and then all the scrubber people. They made a lot of money, right, in installing all these scrubber installations and so on, right? But in the end, it's the end user that's going to pay. If it's a bag of cement, or if it's a loaf of bread, or if it's a kilo of sugar for your coffee, the end user is going to pay, and that's inflation, and I think that's the only way that ever is gonna stop. There needs to be, like, I don't know, a revolution, basically, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean, though, Willem, that we can't do something to optimize.
No,
right?
definitely.
I think we need to shift the mindset from, look, it's just reporting is a pass-on cost for the end user. And we need to start having the conversations like how we as owners can be more competitive, because our ships can be more competitive, right? The same way people sort of are willing to pay more because our ships burn less. And that, in theory, with new regulations coming in, with the FuelEU and EU ETS, that will be sort of enhanced the savings. I think that there's definitely a conversation on the operational side where if we can get together and share some of these upsides by sort of again implementing technology and everything, that is definitely something that I think will be worth looking at, particularly when. Look, ship owners, shipping is a service industry, right? Nobody kind of goes out and charters a bulk carrier just because they want to charter a bulk carrier, right? There must be demand there. As a ship owner, I can tell you today, I would love to have a fleet of sort of, hydrogen fuel or nuclear fuel ships, the most sort of green. But unfortunately, it doesn't make any economic sense at the moment to do so because there is no demand for such type of vessels, right? And that's where we need to stimulate the conversation, I feel. We need to ensure that there is visibility on this cost, and that then, ensuring that with the right technology, with the right mindset, if we work together, we can reduce this cost, which then ultimately brings some economical advantage to your point, Willem, where, if your competitor are willing to move it for $1 less, you say, look, I'm sorry, but I can't really sort of pitch in because otherwise I'm not selling my cement. But if we can do that in a sort of more economically viable way, then why not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of
course.
Sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, I just want to push back a little bit because I appreciate what you say, but like you said, you're a family-owned company and you have a high ESG and social involvement from your owners, but many of the other owners are not as socially or environmentally aware as you. They are in it for the cents. So yes, you are ready to invest in new ships and so on, but there's also people who will underbid you.
But look, I'm a very much an optimist, but I genuinely believe that once we start sort of trying to push back against what you just said, I agree. There are some owners which just basically want to make money no matter what, and they don't particularly care. But believe you me, there is also quite a large amount of owners out there which are indeed sort of looking at this in a different way. And I'm not just saying, we're just some Robin Hood, we want to do it. My point is that if we do this right, it also economical sense to actually go down this path. And somewhere we need to start from somewhere, right? And I think it's quite important. And what we're trying to do is trying to build a relationship with chargers and look, let's try and do that. Initially, it might be a little bit of an investment, maybe on the technology side or whatever, but then we start looking at it in the longer run. And I really believe that unless we do that, I'm not sure our business will be economically viable for this specific reason in 10, 15 years from now, given where technology is going at the moment.
Brian, I feel like Willem and Luigi are almost on opposite sides of the table, and your role is to get them on the same side of the table, looking at the problem as how they can collectively solve it. So let's get down to the kind of practicalities now. How can we move from this almost sort of slightly fragmented view of how this relationship functions to a view where we can actually capture the economic value and then split it between the two parties, because that's ultimately what we're going to get to. So how does that actually work in reality?
It's really interesting because, I built my career, I've been in this for 30 years now, and basically off the back of performance claims, dealing with speed claims, fuel claims. And over the last several years, we've really shifted our focus from traditional weather routing to voyage optimization. And originally the idea behind that was to accelerate decarbonization. But what we saw, and it's really fascinating, is that if the owner and the charterer work together on this, and we are seeing this more and more, and we have the buy-in of the captain and the chief engineer on board, voyage optimization can conservatively save 3 to 4% on any voyage in terms of reduced fuel usage, reduced cost to the voyage. And it's a mutual benefit. It's not just the charterer who gets that. For the owner, what we can see is that obviously there's no performance claims that are coming up through their desk, which is one more headache to resolve. Traditionally around voyage optimization, this sort of one of the owner's points was that they felt that voyage optimization was just simply slow steaming, which in a lot of cases it is reducing the speeds. But with Accelleron, that's part of the reason we joined them, is that we have eyes on the engine. We can ensure that we're not doing any damage to the engine or increasing the maintenance costs. So it's a bit of a quick win-win. It's what I call a low-hanging fruit. And then if you take that and move it to the engine and to the hull and collect all those low-hanging fruits, there's some really interesting savings for both parties, and not just the charters, but the owners as well. And this is things that don't require a lot of CapEx. They're mostly software-based, and with a human in the loop element that we have on our side. So this is something that baby steps. I mean, I think this is not something that is going to magically happen overnight, but we want to start those conversations between the counterparties. I think what we're seeing in the market right now is a bit of a gap happening, and we see certain owners. I think Luigi was saying that they like to work with certain charters over and over again, or maybe I'm not sure if that's the same for Willem, that they have preferred owners that they have very good relationships with. And those are the ones that we feel that our platform can really help, in that we can have a sort of safe place where they can exchange certain information, work together, and mutually see the benefits together of what they're doing. Yeah. There will always be certain owners and certain charters who are going to still want to hang on to those performance claims, and they like working in that manner. It suits what they're doing, their type of trade. But I think the thing to remember here too, and the challenge for us, is that the market is so segmented. I mean, we work with bulk owners, we work with tankers, we work with LNG, all very different. And I mean, even within bulkers, you can have very different clients within there, and their needs are different. So to find one sort of solution that fits all is not possible at this point. What we have to try and do is really ensure, first and foremost, that the data is clean, that it is good quality data. And then, as I said before, make actionable things. One of the things that always came back to us from the beginning was, what's the weather going to be like on this voyage? And this was a common question amongst the commercial departments, that sometimes we'd use a standard percentage of 7, 8, 10% for any voyage in the world, anywhere, any time of year. And we've created simple tools that they can drill down in their own data and see on a certain voyage at a certain time of year. Don't use 8%. It should actually be 14%. Things like that are very doable, and data can support that. That I feel we have the data for. Now it's going to the next level where our clients are trying to say, well, which ship should we fix for which type of business? Again, the data is there. It's just a matter of organizing it and getting it into those digestible chunks where they can really take action on it.
And I guess that a lot of that feels like actually what it comes down to is asking the right kind of questions internally, externally, to each other of your technology. It's the kind of quality of the sort of questions you're asking and where you're asking them makes a massive difference there.
Yeah, I think too the challenge in our industry is that over the last, I'd say, coming out of COVID, there's so many new companies. I think tech companies saw an opportunity in shipping and saw the digital, how far they were behind digitally, and have jumped in. A lot of these companies are not what I would typically call shipping companies, or people with shipping knowledge. So they've created beautiful platforms that look nice, but haven't really addressed the questions that people like Willem and Luigi would have. And and there's a gap there. So, for people who have been in the industry, what I would call the more traditional companies who can now go digital, I think they have an advantage because they understand shipping. And part of my job is talking to people like Willem and Luigi and just listening to what their frustrations are, what their pain points are, and then trying to communicate that to my team and saying, how can we organize the data to address those pain points?
Yeah, but also, Brian, let me add something to that. Not to drum to play your drums too much, but the difference for me when we deal, for example, with you is that where obviously change comes from management, change from corporate. But the truth of the matter is, if you then don't have this sort of interaction at all different layers, where you actually have shipping people, engineers that can speak with engineers, I can tell you immediately our team quickly loses interest in that. So to your point, a lot of the companies out there today are, people with shipping knowledge, but they're not shipping people. And these are very, two different things, you know what I mean? So you need to have the technology, but also the truth of the matter is, I still feel we are still very much a people's business, right? You still need the human interaction and the human input into something like this. So technology is the answer, but it cannot just be left alone. You can't just throw technology at the ship and with the hope of making it better. So it needs to be a little bit of a combination of both.
Completely agree.
And just one more question on that, just because you mentioned Blue Visby earlier, Luigi. Willem, do the contractual frameworks exist? And taking performance claims, I think, is a great example, right? Where you can there's a tangible thing you can go after to try and reduce. But looking at the kind of longer term picture, do we need new contractual clauses, new contractual ways of working to enable this kind of sharing of benefit, or can we do it by sort of working through what exists today?
No, I think, and I took a quick peek at the Q&A, and there's actually a question for me exactly on this topic. So it comes at the right time probably. Or I don't know if you caught it there. So somebody's asking, how about the green corridors and the green COAs? And I have an example of this. We had a ship owner who came to us and said, we want to do a green COA with you. So in principle, we benchmark the route from load port discharge port, and on a standard vessel, this would be the CO2 emissions. That's the benchmark. And we ask any DNV or whoever to verify. And then when we perform for each lifting, we'll fix a ship from the market, and then we'll see if we then emit more CO2 than the benchmark. We'll give you a rebate on the freight. And if we emit less CO2 than the benchmark, then you have to pay us a premium. And I thought this is genius. In my ears, this is how it should be, right? Or at least this is an incentive for everybody. So I made a nice slideshow and I went to the top management. And when I was telling them that, oh, we can get a rebate if they emit more CO2, they were all, on the table and cheering. And then when I told them, but if they emit less CO2, then you have to pay. And then they were like, no, stop. So, and that's the challenge that is still there, right? So, and if you do this green COA with, I don't want to, but if you do this with a European company, they will accept it because they have they have all these emissions in, they experience it. But do this with somebody in an upcoming market, maybe in West Africa or in China, and they will not support stuff like this, right? So I think the change is there, and the possibilities are there, and the proposals are there. But what we need is to see more of a mindset change, and that will come, but it just takes some more time.
Yeah. I think that speaks to the value that people place on certainty, and when you put any kind of negative uncertainty in front of a business leader, or in whatever market, then I can see how you end up in a position where they will back away from it. But that's fascinating. Louis, what's your take?
I think it was, so let me just, your example that you had before, that the guys, they are building your house, right? Or they're renovating your house. Imagine they come 3 months after and they said, oh, by the way, the cement we used was actually more CO2 friendly, so you have to pay a little bit more. Will you? Right? So you
I'm
cannot
not answering that phone call.
No, exactly.
Louis, what's your take on green corridors? I'm just curious, and this whole kind of COA.
Look, I think I think Brian mentioned earlier, right? Shipping, it's not one thing, right? You have dry bulk, you have tankers, you have container ships. At the moment, green corridors on dry bulk, which has got a far more industrial nature, so where we don't deal with the ultimate sort of the customers and the people on the high street. They're hard, but they're coming. They're coming. I really do. Look at what's happening now between Australia and China, with FMG booking in all these sort of ammonia carriers. And I think at the moment, there's simply not enough ships there to make too much sense of that. This will come. But if we walk away for a moment from dry bulk and look at container ships, that's a completely different story. There are people there willing to pay more for decarbonization because of the technology, because of block building, because ultimately they see an immediate impact in the way their company is perceived by the general public. Blue VSB rules, by the way, is nothing new. If you look at container ships, they are using it's software. They're using it every single day to optimize the way the ships go in and go out, and to optimize their trade. So weirdly enough, we shouldn't be speaking about shipping as a wall. We should be speaking, it's very different. There's very different dynamics. But in a nutshell, I think they are coming. I think there's quite a lot of interest now. It will be driven a lot by regulation and will be regional, obviously. But ultimately, I think it's something that we'll see more of in the next 24 months.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think with the green CP, we've spoken to lawyers, we've spoken to brokers around this topic and how the charter party could look different. And a lot of them were saying that they had the similar experience of what Willem was saying, that people are happy when it works one way, but when they have to actually put something out of their pocket to the counterparty, it doesn't work. And they were looking at it more as once you have that digital twin and you've run your simulations and can support it with data that is transparent to both sides and say, do we all agree with this data, that you work more with a range, plus or minus 3%. It's just within an acceptable range. There is nobody's getting a kicker at the end. But if it falls outside of that range, then there are repercussions for either side.
Yeah.
There's a question here, which Brian, I'll send in your direction first. Our business can run studies that recommend what energy saving devices will give you ROI on a specific vessel. But who makes the decision to run the study and then makes the decision to implement the change and ultimately reduce the fuel bill? The charterers and the ship owners seem to just be looking at each other. And given that you're in a similar kind of world, I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because I think for us too, the tricky part is benchmarks. We can talk about ROI, and of course, people want to know what is the benefit of any of these solutions that we use. And what we like to do is sit with the client and sit with them and say, well, how do you want to measure benchmarks? And a lot of different ways that we've heard. Some people will say, you know, pre-voyage, we were running our voyage comparisons and giving figures. And they say simply, we want to look at the end of the voyage and see how close were you to your predictions. Other ones will say, no, we want to take a more technical approach. And I have other ones, third ones, who will say, well, Brian, listen, we do the same business over and over again, year after year. If you're really saying that you're going to reduce fuel usage by 3 to 4%, all we have to really do is compare year on year on year. We'll see it. We'll know right away. We know our numbers really well. We know what we do. We understand that business. So there's no one or right question or not. What we're trying to promote is transparency here, and to work with the client in really figuring out what they're looking at, and then trying to agree with them on a benchmark that they can take into account.
Yeah.
And on energy saving devices specifically, I've seen some quite innovative, chartering models where, the owner will pay, but then the charterer will commit to a time charter that might be 10 years that sort of underwrites that investment. Luigi, how do you think about energy saving devices in the fleet and kind of how you underwrite the investment?
So we have taken a very pragmatic sort of approach to that, because the truth of the matter is, to achieve better speed and consumption and efficiency, to a large degree, you don't need to spend huge amount of money. Yes, you can go out and spend millions of dollars on fantastic sort of pieces of machinery. Albeit I feel today there isn't one solution which gives me great confidence, but there is small things, starting from changing your LED lights, for example, to silicone paint. We find it to be something which is very, very, very interesting, particularly today where the cost of copper is very high. But also, Nick, there's another tier when I look at it from a ship owning point of view. Don't forget green financing. Today, if your ships are greener, you can get better terms, and all of a sudden, you have a very interesting scenario where your investment is basically paid for by a reduction of your capex. So pretty much today, for every ships that we own and every ships that we manage, and it's about 100 of them at the moment, we basically carried out an analysis, and we started from very tiny sort of changes that we can do to the more dramatic ones that we can do, obviously, to ensure that the ship is CII compliant, and that, by the way, that's another theme. But it's as an owner right now, we need to look at the lifetime of the ship and the CII rating. From a charter's perspective, maybe it's just one voyage. So we need to start sort of also changing and shifting that sort of mindset. But specifically, what we've done is, again, we wanted to understand a little bit better. So we have invested in companies that actually do engine optimization. So we could kind of sort of peek through the curtain and understand how these bits of software do. We're looking at hardware, sort of carbon capture, of course, any type of engine that can come across, and any little change that we can really push to ensure that our ships are more efficient.
I think if I can again, I took I cheated and I looked at the Q&A, and Anne-Marie, she's asking if the banks should be involved, and because you mentioned green finance, I think that's a valid question, right? Because you get a cheaper interest rate to buy ships if you buy greener ships, right? So imagine if the banks who issues the letter of credit, if they gave a lower interest rate on the commodity financing, if we use less CO2, that's a great incentive, right? So if we could develop something like the Poseidon principles, but not for the hardware, but for the commodity trade, then I think that would be an easy, or not an easy, but that would be a good way. So I think that's a good angle if we can get the banks involved, definitely.
And Willem, I think that's the answer to the question sort of you posed earlier. It's like, how do we get sort of the market to kind of come in, for ship owners across the board? And I think that's probably one of the answers there, right? Financing is at the core. It's a leverage business. Particularly today where, quite frankly, we are in an extraordinary market, right? There is time, there is resources out there for owners to kind of look at that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read that out, and then Brian, I'll bring you in on it because it's interesting. The question is: do owners are good at compliance? So, do we need regulation that addresses the waste of time that exists in a voyage? So, if it was if it was a requirement to justify, for example, the time wasted on demurrage, banks open credit on specific dates, and this causes congestion following commodity trading. Just in time is just one aspect, but there's lots of other things you could do. It's a really interesting idea. I'd never really considered it, but when you think about the cost of, Willem, you'll know better than I, 200,000 tons of concrete, a change of percentage on that financing suddenly becomes very expensive or very cheap. Brian, what's your take on that?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to chime in. I think the point that Willem made was excellent, and you will see pressure coming from different places. I know with certain container lines, they are under a lot of pressure from certain organizations whose membership includes, companies like IKEA, like Nike, who want their cargoes moved in a certain manner. And this can even tie to things that are not really commercial. Like we are now working with Whale Guardians, an organization out of Antwerp. And this was largely based due to pressure from companies like IKEA, who want to ensure that the containers, their cargoes are moving across and not only reducing emissions, but trying to do things like limit whale strikes and putting pressure on those companies to ensure whoever they're using to route these vessels is taking that into consideration and showing how they're doing these things. So the pressure will come from different places. We're seeing it even to that earlier example of the silicone paint. We have a lot of clients who are large charters who have a significant portion of their fleet, which are period ships. And they're running those ships for 1, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years. And they're increasingly getting approached by the paint manufacturers saying, why don't you approach the owners, split the cost of this paint, and you'll benefit from it over the next 5 years. And then they're using platforms like us to measure that benefit. We have the data before the paint was put on. We have the data after the paint. We can tell them what the improved performance was. And then this sort of visibility for both the owner and the charter to see together if their joint investment was worth it or not.
I think we've got time for one more question. There's one that's quite interesting here, actually. If EU regulation is driving decarbonisation incentives, which other stakeholders or mechanisms are shaping similar incentives in other regions? And what do you see as most impactful? We started kind of listing out some in the discussion earlier, but what have we seen from around the world that's going to have a big impact here?
Well, if obviously UK is starting now from the 1st of July, but that's basically a consequence. The proximity to the EU bloc, I think, kind of grants that, and there's alignment on the mindset. The rest of the world, I cannot see anything sort of definite at the moment. But as I said, I think there is a move towards different type of fuels. Look at Brazil, America, the big producer of ethanol. That is something that it's coming. Hopefully, there will be that will be one of the compromises around sort of the IMO. But obviously, we need China to do something. The biggest sort of commodity importer. I think ultimately there is a lot of goodwill there. We are going through some special time in the world, which is quite interesting, right? Because the cost of fuel is going up increasingly because of what's happening in the Middle East. And that, for the wrong reason, to be honest, seems to be pushing some of these regulations, particularly in Europe, where, to be independent, they're looking at different type of fuels, which are a little bit more sort of environmentally friendly. And we're seeing an acceleration on that. But I fear that until there is some sort of common ground at the IMO level, it'll be quite hard to see some real sort of progress in other regions.
That's a really, really helpful summary. Thank you, Luigi. We are rapidly, unfortunately, running short of time, although I feel like we could continue this chat for many hours to come. If there was one piece of advice that ship owners or charters or even technology suppliers in the audience should sort of take back to their organizations after this session, to improve this performance, whether it's commercially driven or compliance driven. What would it be? Willem, why don't you kick us off with that?
If I had the answer, I would not be sitting here. I would probably somewhere on a beach in the Caribbean or something. I don't know. I don't know. I think if it's two words, I want to say it's one word, two words. It's a peer pressure. Is that right? If
Nice.
we all push each other to do something that's for the good of everybody, I think that's the best way to do it, right? If I go to a shipping conference and I'm the only one not having a green COA, then I will feel left out, right? Then I would make a green COA, right? So I think if we the peer pressure is the mindset, the trust. I think they're big words, but I think they are the essentials in this, right? If Luigi and me could see eye to eye on everything, then we would share everything openly, and we would have the same interest, right? But it's a bit of way still, but I think the signs are there. Like Brian says, the last couple of years has been, it's been going like this, and the last couple of years going like this, right? So I'm positive for the future, but I think peer pressure, that sounds good to me, actually. Yeah.
I like it. Luigi?
I think along the lines of this, change the mindset from the inside, align interest, ensure that whatever is that you're doing is not in a fixed silo, and try and find that beautiful intersection where interests are aligned, and most importantly, that will immediately, I think, open a world where the economics also will come into play, because we need to be pragmatic, right? We run businesses, and it's important that we look at this as a business. But I really feel today, because of the starting regulation and because of where the world is going, that will become a thing.
And last word goes to Brian.
Yeah, I think, change is always different in anything in life, not just shipping, but and people are afraid of change. And we run into a lot of companies who are just, I would say, paralyzed right now and not knowing what to do. And I think any big challenge or any big problem, you can turn it into a commercial advantage. You can be, if you're willing to embrace is not the right word, but jump into it and to really explore it and see what you can do, you can come out ahead in this. So just to say to people that it is intimidating, but things are changing. You have to, Luigi was mentioning before about hiring a digital person who is not a tech person, but just looking at the digital landscape. That's important these days. And I'm the proof of that, because I'm not a tech guy, but I'm shifting over into that industry after 30 years.
It's on me to bring this to a close. I think there's a huge amount of goodwill out there, and I genuinely believe that the vast majority of the industry is trying to move us all in the right direction. I think we're now at a unique moment in time where the technology exists to be able to genuinely improve the performance of the fleet. It all comes down to incentives, and I came into this thinking it was regulations and market, but I'm going to add a third as an incentive to pull, and that's peer pressure. So thank you, Willem, for that. I will steal it. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for joining and following along the discussion. Thank you for all your questions. We didn't get time to answer all of them. My apologies. We'll follow up on the ones that we missed. Thank you to Willem, Luigi, and Brian, and thank you to the Accelleron team for making this whole thing happen as well. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a wonderful and safe day. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.